On what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, Isabella Carter stood frozen at the frozen day altar, her white gown shimmering under the golden light of the cathedral chandeliers. But, instead of joy, silence pressed down on the room like a crushing weight. 300 guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting toward the door, where her maid of honor had burst in moments earlier, face streaked with tears. The words still echoed like thunder in Isabella's ears. He's gone. Adrian left. With Claire. Her fiancé, Adrian Blackwell, the man she had trusted for 2 years, had not only abandoned her but had run away with Claire, her closest friend since college. Betrayal burned deeper than heartbreak. The whispers in the pews sliced into her like knives. Did you see this coming? I always thought Claire was too close to him. Poor Isabella, how humiliating. Every detail Isabella had planned with love and care now mocked her, the roses in her bouquet, the 3-tiered cake waiting at the reception, the first dance song that would never play. She had dreamed of building a perfect marriage, a life filled with stability and devotion. Instead, she was left standing alone, her dreams collapsing around her like fragile glass. Her parents rushed to her side, but even their comforting arms could not erase the hollow ache inside her chest. She stared at the empty space where Adrian should have been. Where promises of forever were supposed to be spoken. Now, somewhere far away, he was likely laughing with Claire, celebrating their escape from the life Isabella had once believed in. Yet beneath the shame and despair, a seed of realization began to take root. Perhaps this was not just an ending, but a brutal beginning. The man who walked away had freed her from living a life of compromise. The friend who betrayed her had revealed the truth of false loyalty. Though the pain was unbearable, Isabella felt the faint stirrings of determination. This day had shattered her illusions, but it would not define her. Someday, she would rise, not as a broken bride, but as a woman reborn. After the disaster at the altar, Isabella Carter thought the world had ended. 4 weeks she lived in a fog of shame, replaying the whispers, the pitying stares, and the cruel truth that the man she was about to marry had chosen her best friend instead. Everywhere she turned in her hometown, reminders of Adrian and Claire lingered. At the grocery store, an elderly neighbor would pause, giving her that soft, pitying look before asking how she was holding up. On social media, pictures of her abandoned wedding day floated around like ghosts. She could not escape. Every corner of that small city held a memory of what she had lost. And each memory was a knife twisting deeper into the wound. But one quiet morning, as Isabella sat in her childhood bedroom staring at the boxes of untouched wedding gifts stacked in the corner, she felt something shift inside her. She realized she could not breathe in a place that had become nothing but a graveyard of her broken dreams. If she stayed, she would forever be the girl left at the altar, the tragic story whispered at dinner tables. If she left, maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to define herself not by what she had lost, but by what she could build. She opened her laptop, pulled up a blank document, and began making a list. Things I've always wanted to do but never dared. The very first line was something she had dreamed of since college, but always pushed aside, because Adrian insisted it was impractical. Open my own bakery. Baking had been Isabella's refuge since she was a teenager. When her parents argued, she baked. When exams stressed her out, she baked. When she fell in love, she baked elaborate cakes as tokens of affection. There was peace in the rhythm of it, flour dusting her hands, the steady whir of a mixer, the sweet scent of sugar and butter rising warm from the oven. Adrian used to tell her it was a nice hobby, but teaching elementary school was stable, and he wanted her to focus on being practical. For years, she had agreed, convincing herself that stability mattered more than passion. But now, with nothing left to lose, she realized the dream had never died. It had simply been waiting for her to be brave enough. Her savings account money she had once imagined would go toward a honeymoon in Greece or a down payment on a suburban house suddenly had a new purpose. Instead of building the life Adrian wanted, Isabella would build her own. She began researching small, coastal towns, looking for somewhere far enough away from the gossip and pity, but close enough to feel like home. That's when she remembered Harborview, a seaside village she had visited with her parents one summer years ago. She could still picture it vividly, a main street lined with colorful shops, the ocean breeze carrying the smell of salt and pine, neighbors who waved at strangers as if they'd known them forever. Harborview had felt like a place where new beginnings could take root. By the end of the month, Isabella had packed her belongings into the back of her car. She left behind the unopened wedding gifts, the venue brochures that mocked her from her desk drawer, and even the framed engagement photos that she had once thought were timeless. As she pulled out of her parents' driveway, she felt a surprising calm. The life she had planned was gone, but the road ahead was wide open. The drive to Harborview took 7 hours. With each mile, the weight of her old life lifted. By the time she saw the shimmer of the Atlantic on the horizon, her chest no longer felt crushed by humiliation but expanded with the first breath of freedom she'd taken in months. The storefront she found on Harbor Street was nothing glamorous, a narrow shop with peeling paint, dusty windows, and a faded for lease sign taped crookedly to the glass. But when Isabella stepped inside and ran her hand over the worn wooden counters, she felt something stir. The space smelled faintly of cinnamon, as if the walls remembered the bakery that had once thrived there years before. She knew immediately this was where her story would begin again. Transforming the space was harder than she imagined. She scrubbed floors until her hands blistered, repainted walls until the air smelled of fresh beginnings, and learned more about plumbing and wiring than she'd ever expected. There were nights she lay awake in the small apartment she had rented above the shop, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But every morning, when she pulled on her apron and experimented with recipes in the newly restored kitchen, the doubt faded. Each batch of croissants, each tray of cookies, each layer cake brought her closer to a vision she had once buried. A bakery filled with warmth, laughter, and the comforting smell of fresh bread. She named it Morning Light Bakery, because after the darkest chapter of her life, she wanted to create a place that always reminded her, and anyone who stepped inside that dawn comes after every night. The grand opening was modest. A few curious townsfolk wandered in, drawn by the scent of brockened cinnamon rolls and the cheerful sign Isabella had painted herself. The local mailman bought 2 scones and promised to come back every Tuesday. A mother with 3 children stopped by, and the kids devoured chocolate chip cookies so quickly she gave them extras on the give house. By the end of the day, Isabella had sold almost everything she had baked. And for the first time in a long time, she went to sleep smiling. It wasn't easy. There were slow weeks when only a handful of customers came through the door, and Isabella worried about paying rent. There were moments she missed the security of her teaching job or the illusion of safety that being engaged had once given her. But there was also freedom to wake each morning with purpose, freedom to pursue a dream that was hers alone, freedom to discover strength she never knew she had. And as she looked out from the bakery window one evening, the sun setting over the harbor, painting the sky in pink and gold, Isabella whispered to herself, "This is my life now, mine to build, mine to cherish." For the first time since that fateful day at the altar, she no longer felt like a broken bride. She felt like a woman who had chosen to rise. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the narrow streets of Harborview one rainy afternoon when Isabella Carter's life took an unexpected turn. Business at Morning Light Bakery had been steady, but quiet that day. Most townsfolk preferred to stay home when the weather turned gray. She was arranging a tray of blueberry muffins in the display case when the bell above the door chimed softly. At first, Isabella expected to see another regular customer seeking warmth from the rain. But instead, a small figure stood just inside the doorway, water dripping from a bright yellow raincoat. The hood was pushed back, revealing a little girl with wide brown eyes and curls plastered damply against her forehead. She couldn't have been more than 6. "Hello there," Isabella said gently, wiping her hands on her apron. "You look like you've been caught in a storm. Would you like to come sit down?" The girl nodded shyly, her lips trembling slightly as she hugged herself for warmth. Isabella hurried to prepare a cup of hot chocolate, adding extra marshmallows on instinct, and carried it to the table by the window. The little girl's eyes lit up as she wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Isabella asked softly. "Lila," the girl replied. "My daddy works at the ocean place where they study fish." "The Marine Research Station?" Isabella guessed. Lila nodded quickly. Something in the child's solemn expression tugged at Isabella's heart. She seemed too young to be sitting alone in a bakery on a stormy afternoon. "Does your daddy know you're here?" Isabella asked carefully. Lila hesitated, then whispered, "I walked here from school. Mrs. Harris, who's supposed to watch me, had to leave early." "Daddy doesn't know." Concern flickered across Isabella's face. The child was clearly looking for someplace safe, and while her instinct was to keep her close, she also knew a parent somewhere must be frantic. After some gentle coaxing, Lila recited a phone number. Isabella called the research 2 station immediately. Within 10 minutes, the bakery door burst open again, this time with a rush of sea air and a tall man whose dark hair was damp from the rain. His lab coat hung loosely over jeans, and his green eyes scanned the room in panic until they landed on the little girl at the table. Lila, he breathed, relief washing over his face. He swept her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "Daddy, I was safe," Lila insisted, her small arms clinging to his neck. "I came here." She gave me hot chocolate. Only then did the man turn to Isabella. His eyes softened with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough. I'm Daniel Brooks, Lila's father. I was terrified when I heard she hadn't come home." "It's all right," Isabella replied, offering a reassuring smile. "She was safe here the whole time. She's a wonderful little girl." Daniel's shoulders sagged, the tension finally leaving his frame. He looked around the bakery, taking in the cheerful yellow walls, the smell of cinnamon, the warmth that filled the space. "This is a beautiful place," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. Then he added, "I'm glad she found her way here." From that day on, Lila seemed to find excuses to return. Sometimes it was after school, when Mrs. Harris accompanied her, knitting quietly in the corner while Lila and Isabella talked. Other times it was on weekends, when Daniel would stop by, promising his daughter a cookie, if she behaved during errands. Isabella began setting aside ingredients for simple baking projects, teaching Lila how to roll dough, measure sugar, and pipe frosting. The little girl's enthusiasm was infectious. She would giggle when flour dusted her nose, concentrate fiercely when decorating cookies, and beam with pride when Isabella praised her efforts. Soon, the bulletin board behind the bakery counter was filled with Lila's colorful drawings, cupcakes shaped like dolphins, bread loaves sailing like boats, and once, a picture of 3 figures holding hands beneath a sign that read, "Morning Light Bakery." It wasn't just Lila who brightened Isabella's days. Daniel, though often burdened by the demands of his research, gradually became a familiar presence. He would lean against the quartet counter with a cup of coffee, listening as Isabella described her experiments with new recipes, or share stories about the challenges of studying sea turtle nesting sites. There was a quiet strength about him, an unpolished steadiness that made Isabella feel both grounded and curious. One Saturday morning, as Isabella and Lila were frosting cupcakes, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. He was dressed casually in a navy sweater instead of his lab coat, and there was a gentleness in his smile that caught Isabella off guard. "Daddy, look!" Lila exclaimed, holding up a cupcake with orange and yellow swirls. "I made autumn leaves." Daniel chuckled, ruffling her hair. "You're becoming quite the chef." Then, turning to Isabella, he added, "Thank you for all of this. She hasn't been this happy in a long time." The words touched something deep within Isabella. She knew Daniel was a widower. Harborview was a small town, and stories traveled fast. His wife had died years ago, leaving him to raise Lila alone, while balancing his demanding career. Seeing the devotion in his eyes, when he looked at his daughter, Isabella felt an ache of empathy. He was doing everything he could, yet there was loneliness in him that mirrored her own. Later that afternoon, as they all shared cookies fresh from the oven, Lila leaned across the table with the innocent candor only a child could have. "Daddy, can Isabella come to the ocean with us next time? She should see the turtles." Daniel looked at Isabella, his expression uncertain but hopeful. Isabella smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. "I'd love to." In that moment, something shifted. What had begun as an accident, a little girl seeking shelter from the rain, was becoming the start of something Isabella hadn't dared to imagine. A bond not just with Lila, but with her father as well. For the first time since her life had fallen apart, Isabella felt she was no longer just rebuilding. She was beginning to belong. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet transformation for Isabella Carter. What began as a child's innocent visits to the bakery soon unfolded into something deeper, something that reached into the hollow places she once thought could never be filled. Lila's laughter had become the music of the shop, her drawings covering walls that had once been bare, and her constant questions about flour, sugar, and sprinkles turned every afternoon into an adventure. But it wasn't only Lila who lingered in Isabella's mind. More and more, Daniel Brooks began to stay as well. He would arrive to pick up his daughter, pause to sip coffee, and somehow remain long after his original excuse to leave had passed. At first, their conversations were polite, whether recipes, school stories. But as days turned into weeks, they grew bolder, peeling back layers of grief, hope, and resilience. Isabella told him about the betrayal she had left behind, not in detail, but enough for him to understand why Harborview was more than just a town to her. It was her sanctuary. Daniel, in turn, shared glimpses of his late wife, Claire, and the impossible balance of being both father and mother while carrying the weight of scientific research. One evening, Isabella offered to cook dinner in her apartment above the bakery after Lila had begged to stay just a little longer. She made something simple: spaghetti with garlic bread, but the meal stretched into hours. Lila fell asleep, curled against a cushion after her second bowl of pasta, her small hand still clutching one of Isabella's cookbooks. Daniel carefully draped his jacket over her before turning to Isabella with a look that stopped her heart. "She trusts you," he said softly. "She hasn't opened up to anyone like this in years." The words were meant as gratitude, but the weight of his gaze made Isabella's breath catch. "I care about her," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And about you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the steady hum of the oven cooling behind them. Then Daniel reached across the table, covering Isabella's hand with his own. His touch was steady, gentle, and yet it sent a current racing up her arm. From that evening forward, something unspoken shifted between them. They didn't call it love, not yet. But it was there. In the way Daniel began stopping by the bakery, even when he didn't have to, just to sit with her over coffee. In the way Isabella found herself baking extra, knowing he would enjoy a slice of lemon cake after long hours at the research station. And in the way Lila began to draw pictures of her family with 3 figures instead of 2. One Saturday, Daniel invited Isabella to join them at the marine research station. The sun was warm, the sea breeze salty, and Lila was nearly bouncing with excitement to show Isabella everything. They walked together through glass-walled labs where tanks held recovering sea turtles. Daniel explained the work with an intensity that revealed not just expertise, but passion. Isabella admired him all the more for it, this man who carried both science and grief in equal measure, but still found space to nurture hope for the future. Later, as they stood by a cliff overlooking the waves, Lila dashed ahead to collect seashells. Isabella and Daniel lingered behind, the wind tugging at their hair and clothes. "You've given us something I didn't think we'd have again," Daniel admitted, his voice low, almost carried away by the surf. "What's that?" Isabella asked. "Light," he said simply. "Joy. A reason to believe we could be more than just surviving." Her chest tightened, a mix of fear and longing. She had sworn never to need anyone again, never to trust her heart so fully. Yet standing there with him, watching Lila laugh on the beach below, she knew her heart had already chosen. When Daniel turned to her, his green eyes searching hers, she didn't flinch. He brushed a plain strand of hair from her face with tentative fingers, then leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but charged with promise. Isabella's world stilled in that instant, the pain of the past dissolving into the salt air, leaving only the warmth of the present. Afterward, they didn't rush into declarations. They didn't need to. The love between them grew naturally, woven through shared dinners, afternoons teaching Lila to bake, and evenings spent talking about dreams neither had dared to voice before. Isabella became more than a friend to Lila, more than a companion to Daniel. She became part of them. One night, as Isabella tucked Lila into bed after reading a story, the little girl looked up with wide, serious eyes. "Are you going to stay forever?" she asked. The question lodged in Isabella's throat, heavy and sweet all at once. She smoothed back Lila's curls and whispered, "If you'll let me." Lila smiled sleepily. "Good. Because I think you're my missing piece." When Isabella stepped out into the hallway, Daniel was waiting. He had overheard, his expression tender. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were already part of their world. For the first time since her life had fallen apart, Isabella wasn't just surviving. She wasn't just rebuilding. She was creating something new, something fragile and precious, but real. She had found a love that was steady, a child who needed her, and a man who looked at her not as someone broken, but as someone whole. Together, the 3 of them were becoming a family, and for Isabella, that was the truest dream she had ever dared to keep. It was a crisp Friday morning when Isabella Carter's carefully rebuilt life was shaken by a voice she thought she would never hear again. She had just set out trays of fresh pastries at Morning Light Bakery, cinnamon rolls still steaming, lemon tarts glowing golden beneath the glass, when her phone rang. The number flashing across the screen was unfamiliar, but, the moment she answered, her chest constricted. "Isabella," came the voice. Smooth. Familiar. Unwelcome. "It's me. Marcus." For a moment, Isabella couldn't speak. The sound of his name was like a ghost rattling chains. In her ear. The same Marcus Hale who had left her humiliated at the altar, running away with Claire, her supposed best friend. The man who had ripped her life in two. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," she said firmly, her hand tightening around the blouse. "Phone. Please," Marcus begged. "Just hear me out. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Claire, and what we had, it was nothing. It ended within weeks. But you were everything, Isabella. I want you back." The words made her stomach turn. For months she had dreamed of hearing him apologize, dreamed of him admitting the pain he caused. Now, when the words finally came, they felt hollow. She had already built a new life, one where Marcus didn't belong. "I'm not the same woman you left behind," she replied, her voice trembling but steady. "Don't call me again." But Marcus wasn't finished. "I'm coming to Harborview," he said, his tone slipping from pleading to determined. "I need to see you in person." That evening, long after Daniel and Lila had left the bakery with their usual bag of cookies, Isabella was cleaning up when she saw him through the front window. Marcus Hale, in his expensive suit, standing on the sidewalk as if the months apart had been nothing more than a pause. Her heart pounded as she unlocked the door and stepped outside. The sight of him, still handsome, still confident, made her furious. "You shouldn't have come," she said coldly. "You look beautiful," Marcus replied, his eyes sweeping over her apron, the flower on her cheek, the warm light spilling out from the bakery. "This place is quaint." The word stung, condescending as ever. He had always dismissed the things she loved as small, unworthy of her. "What do you want, Marcus?" Isabella demanded. "I want to make things right. I brought a proposal." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "There's a space in downtown Portland. Perfect for an upscale bakery. Investors are ready. We could build something incredible together. 50-50 ownership. Your name on the sign. The life you deserve." Isabella stared at the envelope as if it were poison. "You think you can buy me back?" "I think I can give you the life we always planned," Marcus countered, his voice dripping with conviction. "Luxury, success, admiration. This," he gestured to the bakery behind her, "this is beneath you." Her fury ignited. "This," she snapped, pointing to the glowing windows, the cheerful tables, the walls filled with Lila's drawings, "is my home. My dream. My happiness. And you don't get to belittle it." Before Marcus could respond, a familiar voice called out from the street. "Isabella? Everything all right?" She turned to see Daniel approaching, concern in his green eyes. Lila's small figure peeked from behind his leg, holding a stuffed turtle. The sight of them, her family, her heart filled her with strength. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. "So this is the man. The replacement?" Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "I'm Daniel Brooks. And you must be the man who hurt her." "Correction," Marcus replied smoothly. "I'm the man who can give her everything she deserves. You can't compete with that." Daniel didn't flinch. "Isabella doesn't need everything. She needs love. Respect. A place to belong. And she has that here." The words struck Isabella like a bell ringing clear. She stepped closer to Daniel, sliding her hand into his. "He's right," she said firmly, her voice steady and ringing with truth. "Marcus, what you're offering is hollow. I don't want money. I don't want status. I want this life. With Daniel and Lila. I want the laughter in this bakery, the sunsets over the harbor, the simple joy of belonging. That's worth more than anything you could put in an envelope." Marcus's confident mask faltered. "You'll regret this," he snapped. "In 5 years, you'll look back and wish you hadn't thrown away your chance." "In 5 years," Isabella replied, her chin lifting, "I'll be exactly where I chose to be, with the people who love me for who I am, not what I can provide." She turned her back to him, leading Daniel and Lila inside. The door shut firmly behind her, the final punctuation to a chapter she would never reopen. Inside, her legs trembled, but Daniel's steady hand anchored her. Lila looked up with wide, worried eyes. "Is he the man who made you sad?" she asked. "Yes," Isabella admitted, kneeling so she was eye level with the little girl. "But he can't hurt." me anymore. Because I have something stronger now. She glanced at Daniel, who was watching her with quiet awe. I have a family. Relief softened Lila's face. She threw her small arms around Isabella's neck. Good. Because I want you to stay forever. Tears pricked Isabella's eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of triumph, of freedom. The past had tried to reclaim her, but she had chosen differently. She had chosen love over ambition, truth over illusion, belonging over betrayal. As she stood with Daniel's hand entwined in hers and Lila pressed against her side, Isabella knew with certainty. Marcus Hale had no place in her future. Her happiness was here, in Harborview, with the two people who had turned her broken heart into something whole. Again, the months that followed Marcus Hale's unwelcome visit were like the soft unfolding of spring after a harsh winter. For a time, doubt lingered in the air between Isabella and Daniel, his fear of being abandoned again, her guilt for not sharing her past sooner. But gradually, with patience and honesty, the walls between them crumbled. Daniel began to trust what his heart already knew. Isabella wasn't running away from something when she chose him and Lila, she was running toward them. Each day she proved it, not with grand declarations but with small, steady acts of love. She packed sandwiches for Daniel when she knew he'd lose track of meals at the research station. She braided Lila's hair for school when Mrs. Harris was busy. She filled the bakery with warmth, laughter, and the smell of cookies that always seemed to taste like happiness. For Lila, there was never any question. In her child's heart, Isabella had already become a family, long before the adults gave it a name. She drew pictures of Daddy, me, and Isabella, with a heart around the three of them. She slipped her small hand into Isabella's, as naturally as she did with Daniel's.com. And when bedtime stories ended, she would whisper, I love you, without hesitation. One evening in early spring, Daniel and Isabella sat on the porch of her apartment above the bakery, watching the harbor lights flicker against the darkening sea. Lila had already fallen, asleep inside, curled up with her stuffed turtle. The air smelled of salt and bread, a scent that had come to mean home. I wasted months being afraid, Daniel admitted quietly. Afraid that you'd leave, that Lila would lose another piece of her heart. But you've never once given us reason to doubt. Isabella reached for his hand, her thumb brushing over the roughness of his knuckles. I'm not leaving, Daniel. Not now. Not ever. He turned to her, eyes bright, even in the dim light. Then maybe it's time we stop waiting for happiness to slip away. Maybe it's time we claim it. Isabella's heart leapt, and though he hadn't spoken the words directly, she understood. The next morning, he placed a small velvet box on the counter of the bakery, as she was arranging fresh croissant. Inside was a simple ring. No diamonds, no grand gestures, just a delicate band that spoke of love built on honesty and resilience. Isabella Carter, he said, voice thick with emotion. You've already given me more than I deserve. Will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, yes. Lila squealed with delight when they told her that evening, throwing her arms around Isabella's waist. Does this mean I can call you mommy now? She asked with innocent hope. Isabella laughed through her tears, hugging the little girl tight. If that's what you want, sweetheart. It's what I've been wishing for all along, Lila replied solemnly, as if sealing a promise only children could make. A year later, on a warm summer evening, their wishes came true. The wedding was nothing like the one Isabella had once planned with Marcus. No towering cathedral, no endless guest list, no suffocating expectations. Instead, it was held on the beach at Harborview, with the ocean as their witness, and the sunset painting the sky in pinks and golds. Friends and neighbors gathered in a small semicircle on the sand. Mrs. Harris dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. The mailman, Mr. Rodriguez, brought a bouquet of wildflowers from his garden. The fisherman who often stopped for bread stood proudly, as if marrying Isabella into their town was the most natural thing in the world. Lila walked down the sandy aisle in a purple dress she had chosen herself, carrying a basket of seashells instead of petals. When she reached the front, she grinned at Isabella and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. You look like a princess, Mommy. The crowd chuckled softly, and Isabella felt her heart swell until it nearly burst. Daniel waited for her barefoot in the sand, his eyes shining with quiet joy. When she joined him, the pastor spoke simple words about love, family, and second chances. But Isabella barely heard anything beyond the sound of waves and the steady rhythm of Daniel's voice. When he said, I choose you, Isabella. I choose our life, our dreams, Our family. When it was her turn, Isabella looked out at the people who had become her world, and then back at the man and child who had become her home. I thought my story ended when I was left at the altar, she said, her voice catching with emotion. But that day only brought me here to you, Daniel, and to you, Lila. Today, I promise to love you both with all that I am, to be not just a wife, but a mother, and to never take for granted this family we've built together. When the vows were spoken, and the kiss sealed their union, cheers erupted across the beach. Lila jumped up and down, clapping her hands. She's my mommy now, my very own. Mommy Isabella, she shouted, her joy infectious. Daniel lifted her into his arms. And Isabella wrapped them both in an embrace that felt like the completion of a circle long left open. That night, under string lights swaying between driftwood poles, they celebrated with cake from Isabella's bakery and music provided by local friends. It was simple, imperfect, and entirely theirs. Isabella caught herself thinking how grateful she was for the betrayal that had once nearly destroyed her. Without it, she would never have come here, never have found the love that was meant for her all along. As the stars appeared and Lila dozed on Daniel's shoulder, Isabella leaned into her new husband, her heart at peace. She wasn't the broken bride anymore. She was a wife, a mother, and part of a family stronger than any vow could have promised. And when the ocean whispered against the shore, Isabella knew. This was the life she was always meant to choose. Sometimes, what feels like the end of the world is only the beginning of a life we were truly meant to live. For Isabella Carter, being abandoned at the altar seemed like a wound she would never heal from. Yet that very loss opened the path that led her to Harborview, to a little bakery filled with warmth, and ultimately, to Daniel and Lila, the family she never expected but always needed. She discovered that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, by choice, and by the willingness to stand together through storms and sunshine alike. Her story reminds us all that pain doesn't have to be the last chapter. The betrayal that once crushed Isabella's spirit became the very turning point that led her toward genuine happiness. Life may take away what we think we want, only to give us what we truly need: people who love us for who we are, dreams that are our own, and a home built not from perfection, but from love. Even in our darkest moments, we must believe that something greater can rise from the ashes. True family is not about sharing the same bloodline, it's about sharing love, loyalty, and the courage to build a future together. If Isabella's journey touched your heart, leave a comment with your thoughts, share this story with someone who might need hope today, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us love and family can be found in the most unexpected places.